everybody, and welcome to our webinar this evening. My name is Scott Lucy. I'm the Business Development Director for Durolife here in the UK and for Ireland. I'd like to start by giving you a brief background with regards to Durolife's association with the World Healthy Living Foundation. Durolife is, in fact, the founder and funder of the foundation since its inception back in 2015. The foundation promotes education in the field of healthy living, inspiring individuals to take good care of their health and improve the quality of their lives. And we'd love to hear from where you are calling us this evening. So please enter your name and your city or country into the chat box below. And as you can see, the foundation has been in existence for 7 years now. And we have 27 experts on the panel, 95 organisers, 97 ambassadors, and we've run virtually thousands of conferences and have many thousands of participants, as you can see. So with the support of our experts, the foundation communicates through a variety of educational solutions, including publications, lectures, and practical courses. And you can contact the foundation through our Facebook pages and follow us on Instagram. So it's my honour and privilege this evening to introduce you to our expert speaker, Dr. Dorian Dugmore from England. Dr. Dugmore is a founder and CEO of the Wellness Academy. He has a PhD in cardiovascular medicine and is recognised internationally as an expert in cardiovascular health, preventative medicine and wellness. During his long and impressive career, he's initially played and then coached football internationally. He's run 26 marathons, 26 marathons, was program director for the world famous Toronto Rehabilitation Centre for recovering heart patients. And he built the award-winning Adidas Corporate Wellness Program, as well as the Fit to Manage program for football managers, and served as the nucleus for sport cardiology in Europe. Now, his wellness programs have achieved both national and international acclaim. So welcome, Dr. Dugmore. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Scott, and good evening, everybody. It's the second instalment of our Younger Next Year program, and today we're going to be focusing on the heart, and a very, very important organ, size of roughly a male adult fist. And the heart's major job is to pump blood, oxygen-rich blood around the body. It has 4 chambers. 2 at the top are called atrium. They accept blood from around the body and from the lungs. And then the bottom 2 chambers are called ventricles, and they're the big pumping chambers. The left ventricle pumps blood around the body, and the right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs to pick up a fresh supply of oxygen. Its role really is threefold. Together with the circulation, the role of the heart and circulation is to transport oxygen-rich blood around the body, attached to the red blood cells, and then to get rid of carbon dioxide, a waste product, out of the body via the respiratory system or the lungs. So the 2 are connected. The heart sits in between the lungs, and the 2 have a vital role to play in the health and well-being of everyone. So the role is transport. The role is also protection, because the red blood cells have certain immune characteristics to protect us. And the role also is a cooling role, where the blood helps to cool areas like the brain and keep the body temperature regulated. So the heart has some major roles. And usually the arterial system, the systemic circulation that pumps blood around the body from the left side of the heart, is depicted in red. And the venous system, blood returning to the right heart, is depicted in blue. Interestingly, the heart is controlled electrically, and down the septum, the center of the heart that usually stops transference of blood from the right to the left heart, it's like a telephone network that's embedded in the septum, and we can actually trace the heart electrically. You can see an ECG on the slide there, which stands for electrocardiogram. And it's very, very simple. Just imagine that you are going into a theatre to listen to an orchestra. When the lights of the theatre get switched on, there's a P wave written on an electrocardiogram. That's synonymous with the two atrium contracting and pushing blood into the ventricle. So the QRS wave is like the conductor of an orchestra, firing up the orchestra. So you've got the QRS bigger wave there that's synonymous with the two ventricles contracting and pumping blood around the body into the lungs. And then you've got the T wave, which is a refractory period where the heart is relaxing and filling. And when you have an electrocardiogram taken, we put electrodes, little stickers all over your torso, and we can look at the heart from 12 different, it's like 12 different camera angles, because there are different electrical pictures of the heart as we look at it from different angles. And so that's what an electrocardiogram is. And it's a very, very useful tool to look at the heart's function. And the really important circulation around the heart, because we just talked about the circulation through the heart and through the various chambers of the heart, but now we're looking at your lifeline. And your lifeline is your coronary arteries. And your coronary arteries, about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. There are 3 major branches, one that goes down the front of the heart. It's called the left anterior descending coronary artery. One that goes to the right of the heart, that's called the right coronary artery. And the one that goes to the left around the back of the heart, that's called the circumflex. And you've got to keep those open and clean, just like water running off glass through those coronary arteries. And they've also got attached to them a tributary circulation. It's called your collateral circulation. And your collateral circulation is like B roads that are supplying the heart muscle itself. It's called the myocardium, with oxygenated blood. But the main A roads, the ones you can see on the heart as you look at the screen there, the bigger arteries, they're the A roads, the main motorways of blood perfusing the heart muscle, the myocardium itself. But unfortunately, what can happen over a long extended period of time is those normal coronary arteries can become blocked. And the disease is called atherosclerosis. And that's a very rich sounding name. And the thing that's happening when that disease develops is a combination of cholesterol and metabolites that are filling up inside the coronary artery, almost silting up the artery, a little bit like rust inside of a water pipe. And clearly the flow then is affected quite dramatically. And then on a fateful day, if that it's called plaque, the atherosclerotic plaque, if that ruptures as shown in the 3rd section of the coronary artery on the screen there, when that plaque ruptures, that's when something like a heart attack or coronary thrombosis or myocardial infarction, they're all synonymous, they're all the same. That's when you get a major event happening. If it happens in the brain, it's a stroke. If it happens in the kidneys, it's renal failure. And that, of course, is a major, major problem. And that's very, very important. The heart we're showing you there is not a very healthy heart. You can see the main A roads, but there are very few B roads, very limited collateral circulation. And that is so important. Why? Because if one of those coronary arteries gets blocked and you have got a good collateral circulation, then the oxygenated blood may be able to transfer around the blockage, and that could mean the difference between survival and non-survival. So in the unhealthy heart there, that's showing you haven't got a good collateral circulation, and it can be more problematic. So there's a very, very good reason for exercising regularly, because we know that exercise builds collateral circulation, just as it builds what we call peripheral circulation in your muscles. So what are the risk factors associated with heart problems and heart disease? Well, the risk factors are the very similar risk factors, of course, for stroke, as well as heart disease. Smoking is a major risk factor. We know that the carbon monoxide from smoking combines 200 times more readily with the pigment that carries oxygen in the blood, the hemoglobin, than oxygen does. So that carbon monoxide literally steals the space for the oxygen carrying capacity in the blood. So over time, that can be a major risk factor and cause major problems. Genetics is another risk factor, and we're still looking at the different elements of what happens when you pass on the genetics of your mother and father or grandparents to the children of the future. And very often with those genetics, risk, or both high or low risk, can be passed on. And the interesting thing is that risk can jump a generation. And so more and more in our clinics, we're looking at people's profiles from their mother and father, from their immediate family, but also from their grandparents. And so a very, very important risk factor that can be protective or can carry risk. Age, of course, is another risk factor. And we know from all the epidemiological studies, epidemiology is the study of populations over a longer period of time. We know from those studies that as people get older, then their lifestyles can very often change. They may not be as active. They may not take so much care of themselves. And as people age, risk increases. And so it's so important to look after your profiles as you age. Alcohol is another risk factor. There's good and bad news about alcohol. There's some research in places like France that show that if people drink moderately with regular breaks in the alcohol, there may be a slight benefit of alcohol. Whereas if people drink lots of alcohol, then the risk can increase the likelihood of heart problems. Alcohol can dehydrate the body. And of course, dehydration affects the blood, and blood is the major product that the heart pumps around the body. So that can be a risk. Also, alcohol and too much alcohol can actually irritate the heart muscle. So it can be a significant risk factor. Unhealthy food is another major risk factor. And we know foods that are heavy in saturated fats, fats that harden at room temperature, can contribute to supporting cholesterol in the body and other metabolites that can cause risk. We also know that foods that are being treated, called trans foods, with the trans fatty acids, can actually really increase risk. Those are foods that in the past have been heavily hydrogenated, that have caused the foods to actually change in structure and increase risk. So that can be a problem. High cholesterol, and people don't realize, but 8% of cholesterol in your body is actually produced and made by the liver. We only get approximately 20% or even less from the food that we eat. And so cholesterol is the thing that some people just happen to produce a lot of, and some people in different scenarios don't produce a lot of it. And so very high cholesterol can really contribute to the accumulation of plaque in the arteries, the things that we talked about earlier, and cause heart problems. Stress is another major risk factor. And we know that stress now is right up there with high cholesterol, high blood pressure as a significant risk factor. When people are stressed, their heart rates can jump up by 30 to 40 beats a minute. And the hormones that are linked with stress, things like adrenaline and cortisol and interleukin-6, those sorts of things can cause major problems, narrowing the arteries, increasing the blood pressure, and really causing significant problems. And it's the constant stress that is the problem, the regular daily stress. And I think in the next presentation, we'll talk a lot about stress and the effects of stress, good and bad stress. Diabetes and the increase in blood sugars in the body are another major risk factor for heart problems and heart disease. And diabetes can, if blood sugars are not used effectively, and we eat diets that are heavy in too many carbs and too many sugary foods, the sugar can be stored as fat, and the fat then can increase the risk of heart problems and really create a major issue. And there are different types of diabetes: type 1 diabetes, where insulin isn't produced by the body, and type 2 diabetes, where people put on weight very often as they get older, and sugars become rift in the body and increase risk and cardiovascular problems. And of course, that leads to the next one, which is obesity, putting on too much adipose tissue, too much fatty tissue. And again, that can cause significant problems. It can put strain and pressure on the heart and the circulation and cause lots of issues. And if you start to combine all of those risk factors, then you can see that the chances of having problems with the heart and with the circulation increase quite significantly. So the cholesterol story, well, it's not complicated, but it's a little bit more detailed than people realize. There's good and bad cholesterol. Now, 80% of cholesterol is made in the liver, and cholesterol is carried by a protein in the blood called a lipoprotein. And 80% I mentioned earlier of cholesterol is made in the liver, and the outgoing protein that carries cholesterol is called LDL cholesterol, low density lipoprotein. It's like a bus with 3/4 of the seats empty. So there's lots of room for the cholesterol manufactured in the liver to get on those seats and travel around the circulation. And when it gets to the coronary arteries and places like that, then the passengers can get off and help to stick and form plaque inside the coronary arteries. So that's why it's called the bad cholesterol. But there's a good cholesterol. It's a return protein. It's called high density lipoprotein or lipoprotein. It's like a garbage collector. And what that does is it picks up unwanted cholesterol, brings it back to the liver to be remetabolized, linked with things like your bile acids, taken out of the body. And so it's a protector. And so that's another number that we should know. So in Europe, total cholesterol we recommend should be less than 5. Bad cholesterol should be less than 3 millimolar. It's measured in millimolar. And good cholesterol, we like it to be 1 to 1.4 millimolar. Now we know that due to different circumstances, females very often tend to have slightly more good cholesterol than males, but that evens up as the aging process takes place over a period of time and things like menopause appear. Then there's another one called triglycerides, and your triglycerides are another type of fat that if you eat food, drink alcohol, they quickly get into the body, and they should be less than 2.3, and they're the forever circulating fats that can create risk. So the cholesterol story is a very important one. And one of the key numbers you should know is called your ratio. And that's how many times does your good cholesterol divide into the total amount of cholesterol that you have. And the lower the ratio, the better. And we like it to be less than 5. And so when we look at the cholesterol story, we need to know the balance between the good and the bad, and we need to know the ratio of good cholesterol to total cholesterol. And so it's an important number for us to know. Blood pressure is another risk factor associated with heart disease. And we know that normal blood pressure should be, in systolic terms, lower than 140, ideally between 100 to 140 and even less. And there are 2 blood pressures. There's systolic blood pressure. That's when the heart contracts and squeezes. And there's diastolic blood pressure. That's when the heart fills and relaxes. And so we regularly, every heartbeat, have systole and diastole, or systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure. We like systolic blood pressure when the heart contracts to be between 100 to 140 and no more. And we like diastolic blood pressure to be between 60 and 90 and no more. Now you can see from the slide there that there are different categories of blood pressure, from normal blood pressure to blood pressure starting to rise. And you can see there, it's called prehypertension. And then when systolic goes over 140 and diastolic goes between 90 to 99, it's measured in millimeters of mercury, then we are getting concerned. And once it starts to get into the regions of 160 or 180 systolic when the heart squeezes, then we are concerned, or 100 to 110 diastolic when the heart should be relaxing. So a nice blood pressure would be 110/70 or 120/80. And as it starts to creep up, we then start to get really concerned. And it's quite interesting. There are two categories very often of people with raised blood pressure. One we call white coat syndrome. That's when the person that goes to the doctor gets very, very nervous and uptight, and their blood pressure tends to go up. But actually, throughout the day, it's fine. That's white coat syndrome. But the one that really worries us is one that's called a hot reactor. And that's the person that when they go to the doctor, they feel very comfortable, they feel relaxed. But as soon as they get back to work or away from the surgery and they're stressed and their blood pressure rises, they're more of a problem very often. And that's why they're called a hot reactor. Quite interesting, really. One of the most famous cases was some years ago now, was President Marcos of the Philippines. It was categorized as a very hot reactor. And when he was actually he's put on trial, he was found to have very, very high reactive blood pressure. So some very, very famous cases have illustrated that feature. But blood pressure is a key number you should know. Another important number is how oxygen saturated your blood is. And that can be tested very, very simply. And we like your blood to be 94, 95% plus saturated with oxygen. Oxygen is linked to a part of your red blood cells called hemoglobin. And we like that blood to be saturated with lots of oxygen. Now, very often, if people are very, very heavy smokers, it will impact on their oxygen saturation and their scores will be below 90%. People with lung disease, a disease called chronic emphysema, where their lungs are really struggling to process the air and its oxygen fraction, have problems. And again, their oxygen saturation values will lower. So there's another measurement and risk factor that we should be aware of when we're looking at heart health. And of course, heart health is very, very important in male or female. And we know that the risk of heart disease in females has increased. I was at a major presentation back in 2005 in Stockholm at the European Heart Conference when, for the first time in history, heart disease risk had equaled and slightly overtaken the risk in males. And yet we all traditionally think that males are the people that suffer with heart problems. Well, not so. And females, together with their changing roles and different developmental factors, can be at risk of heart disease. And it still tends to kill more females than many of the forms of cancer combined. And some of those risk factors are listed there on the left-hand side. Menopause we'll talk about in a moment, but lack of exercise is a key risk factor because then the body circulation tends to get compromised. People put on weight and it's a risk factor. Blood pressure is increasing. That is a risk factor. It's like squeezing the end of the garden hose and really putting the whole body and circulation on tension. That's a risk factor. We've already mentioned a healthy diet, too much drinking and increases in blood pressure. They're all risk factors that are associated with the development of heart disease, particularly in females. Females also, quite interestingly, in the past have been reported with slightly more risk of coronary spasm when the vessels, the circulation stick together a little bit. So there's a lot of very interesting research going on at the moment looking at heart disease risk in females. And when we do menopause is again a very important consideration when we look at heart disease and risk in females. We know that estrogen or estrogen, when those levels fall as females age, particularly over the age of 50 generally, then the estrogen or estrogen has a protective effect on keeping your blood healthy. And when that tends to change and cholesterol tends to be more of a risk, that can be a problem. Weight gain tends to happen when estrogen is reduced in females, and that again can be a risk factor. Smoking, as we've mentioned, is certainly a risk factor. Family history we've mentioned. Some people used to think HRT was a hormone replacement therapy was a risk factor. That is being debated. We know that people in the past have thought that blood clots are accelerated by HRT, hormone replacement therapy, but there's debate about that. And really, prevention is down to managing lifestyle. That's listed on the bottom of the slide there. So having a wholesome lifestyle, regular exercise, keeping weight control as a key priority, checking your blood fat levels, your lipid levels, we've mentioned already. And there's a key one at the bottom, having regular checkups, whether you're male or you're female. And then looking at dietary elements, healthy habits are so important, wholesome diets, hormone balancing supplements can be a really important one. We'll mention some of those at the end. The right medications and, if necessary, surgery. So all of those things are related to cardiovascular risk in females. A really important one, male and female, is a thing called visceral fat. Fat that accumulates around the middle. And we know that very often as populations age and they're not very active, they tend to put on weight. And when they put on weight around the middle, that is a significant risk. The fat tends to surround the organs and almost be a denser fat, harder to get rid of. If you look at people that go on crash diets, very often you'll see they'll lose weight from everywhere else, but the last place for them to lose it is around the middle because the visceral fat is hard to shift. And one of the best ways to do that is by regular, moderate exercise together with the right sort of diet, which we'll talk about in a moment. But that certainly is a risk factor. So we now measure more and more the waist circumference of people. We look at their waist to hip ratio. And if their waist overtakes their hips, then that's a risk factor. But the visceral fat certainly is a significant risk factor. So as we start to bring all those risk factors together, there's a thing called Q risk or Q3 risk in this country, where the percentage of those factors that are significant increase your risk from low risk, where under 10% of all the elements of those factors are scored, to moderate risk, where risk increases to 10 to 15%. And if it's over 15%, we are then getting very concerned about how heart disease risk and the risk of heart attack increase quite significantly. So when we start putting them all together, what does it really mean? Well, we know that if you've got an unhealthy combination of a combination of good and bad cholesterol, that can increase the risk fourfold. So it quadruples the risk. Then if you add to that diabetes, where sugar becomes rife in the body, very often associated with weight gain. That's type 2 diabetes, where the insulin is not capable of controlling the blood sugars. And if that increases, then the risk in women quadruples and doubles for men. So add the two together and you've got 6 or 7 times the risk. Add on to that high blood pressure, hypertension, and that can triple the risk for men and double the risk for women. And you can see there's accumulation now of risk factors. Add to that stress and depression in both sexes, and then risk is increased again threefold. So if you've got all 4 of those factors, we're not talking about a 1-for-1 ratio. We're talking about risk that increase 12-fold, even more. So to combat that, then looking at your diet and following a healthy diet, we'll talk about in a moment, which is a Mediterranean style diet, can reduce risk. Whereas abdominal obesity, that visceral fat we talked about, can double the risk. Lack of exercise can increase the risk by 20% if you don't exercise regularly. Smoking doubles the risk. So you can see it's a time bomb. If those factors are not monitored and checked, then risk can really accelerate. We have a program called Know Your Numbers that really relate to all of those features that need to be measured. And certainly over the age of 40, we'd recommend probably to do that every couple of years so that you know your key numbers and your key markers. Stress, we've mentioned previously. Stress, we know, can increase the risk of heart disease, along with high cholesterol, high blood pressure, some of the elements we've talked about earlier. And for sure, the chemistry associated with that, the adrenaline, the cortisol, can really put the heart on high tension and increase the risk of heart problems. So it's a factor to be considered. And using techniques, and particularly things like meditation and yoga, can really offset the risk of stress as related to heart disease. Alcohol, we've mentioned earlier, is also a risk factor. Too much alcohol can cause dehydration. It can irritate the heart muscle. It can really assist in weight gain. And so moderate drinking, and here's the key message, with at least 2 to 3 days per week when you don't touch alcohol. Takes 36 to 48 hours for the liver to replenish itself after drinking alcohol, particularly too much alcohol. So giving the liver a chance to recover and repair itself is so, so important. And if you don't do that, then you can increase that as a risk factor. Whereas very, very light alcohol, moderate alcohol, can have some benefits. And the units in this country, in the UK, are no more than 14 units a week. And what is a unit? That's a single measure of spirit, a glass of wine, not a goblet, but a glass of wine, and half a beer is a unit. So no more than 14 units a week, and ideally with at least 2 to 3 days where you don't actually touch alcohol. Sleep is another crucial factor that we need to look at in terms of protecting our hearts. And what people don't realize is that during sleep, there's cell repair, there's cell regeneration. And so if you've had a busy, busy day, and particularly a stressful day, you need to have adequate sleep. That's 7 to 8 hours worth of sleep, so your cells can repair and your body can recuperate. But if you don't sleep properly, it increases risk. And it's now suggested that things like taking your phones to bed and some of the harmful rays connected with blue light and the alpha and gamma rays associated with phones and mobile phones can be a risk factor. And so don't go to bed and take your computers and your mobile phones to bed with you. That's not a good idea. Bed is for sleeping and for recovery and for cell repair. So important. Another key factor around healthy hearts and looking at the heart of the matter is if something unfortunately like a cardiac arrest occurs, then it is so important to practice effective CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. That's where cardiac compressions together with oxygen can be applied to save a heart. And we know that if you're quick, if somebody arrests, then you've got 3 to 5 minutes, generally speaking, to start a heart or to keep a heart going. And if it's any longer than that, chances of survival diminish significantly. And so more and more, we are putting cardiac defibrillators into the corporate world and the sporting world to make sure that people are effectively resuscitated should they have a cardiac arrest. So such an important thing when we look at the heart of the matter and look at survival should the unfortunate circumstance occur of having heart arrests and heart problems. So preventing heart disease. Well, there are some great tips there. Getting your numbers regularly measured. You can see the blood pressure number there at the top. Exercising regularly. Following a Mediterranean type diet full of antioxidants, low in saturated fats, but high in the good fats, the omega-3s, 6s and 9s that help your heart, and having a balance of protein, complex carbohydrates, not the sugary, quick fats that tend to get stored in the body and cause risk. Also, a lot of the Mediterranean type foods, you know, the fresh fruits and vegetables and nuts are high in the good fats and high in what we call antioxidants, things that affect health in the body by neutralizing a thing called free radicals. Free radicals are rogue oxygen bonds that can help destroy cells in the body. And so having a healthy diet is very, very important as we look at heart health. And the DASH diet is a great example, the diet associated with reducing hypertension. We know that latest research also shows that Mediterranean type diet, healthy in fresh fruits, vegetables, nuts, plant-based diet, reduces brain inflammation and problems together with heart problems. And we know that dementia is now becoming an increasing problem as the brain ages and as population age, then more and more people are starting to suffer from dementia. So there's a great example of a good diet. Hydration is critically important for heart health. Your blood's 70–80% water. So if you don't drink enough regular water to keep yourself hydrated, your risk is going to increase. The brain at the same level, 70–80% water and more. So keeping yourself hydrated is critically important. So start to put them all together. And here are some tips for a healthy heart. Don't drink too much alcohol. Salt and sodium can actually affect things like high blood pressure. And so try and cut down on the salt and replace by herbs and things that are not heavy in heavy sodium that can be an increased heart risk. Cut the fat out, particularly the saturated fats in your body. Make sure you're active, at least 2 to 3 hours worth of exercise per week, and we'll talk a lot about that in the future. Lose weight. We know that if people lose weight, very often they lose cholesterol. And so monitoring your weight and controlling your weight is very, very important. Lowering your blood pressure is key. Making sure you keep within the regimes that we talked about earlier to make sure that your heart's not on high tension all the time through increased blood pressure. Make sure you get adequate sleep. Remember, the cell repair is so important. And as we age, pump some iron, and resistance training and using light to moderate weights increases the good circulation around muscles. And what does that mean? That means oxygens have got plenty of chances to get off and service the muscles. So look after the body from the cardio and from the weight training, resistance training point of view. Stop smoking and reduce your stress if you can. And meditate is always a good practice. Or maybe start some yoga. So there are some great tips for a healthy heart. And at Duolife, we put together a pack of our supplements and our superb products that can really help develop and protect your heart. Procardiol, natural supplement that can help reduce inflammation and problems there. Same with Procholesterol and Prolumo. Remember, the blood and the heart has an important immunity function. Duo-Day and Duo-Day and Duo-Night. Duolife Night, Duolife Day and Duolife Night. So important. A lot of the key plant-based vitamins and minerals are in those products that can really support us. Vita-C is very, very good for protecting immune function and benefiting the heart. My Blood has some essential plant-based nutrients in it that can protect heart. And some of the Physeasy products that we can take away, ideal for travel, that are effervescent, contain things like L-arginine. L-arginine is a protein, an amino acid that can promote heart health. So you add all these together and you get a nice cardio pack of protective elements that are fantastic for your heart health. I'm now going to put all this together and show you a film. And the film is a clip of us testing when I was head of exercise testing at St George's Park, the International Football Centre. And we're looking at the world of superbike racing. And we're testing two very famous superbike riders, Rainichi Kianara and James Westmoreland, who are on the Bilbase team, and we're testing the pit team. And here's a quick film of our testing, which I'll talk about as we go through. St George's Park International Football Centre. Echocardiogram, looking at like an ultrasound picture of the heart. Nutrition, looking at what people are eating and their hydration. Very, very important. Flexibility and muscular strength. We just talked about that earlier. So important. Looking at the torque of the riders. There's Kianara. Looking at him being tested on his bike. That's James Westmoreland being tested on a cycle ergometer and pushed to his limit, looking at his heart responses and looking at his respiration. So people are pushing themselves. There's the electrocardiogram, the thing we talked about earlier. And there am I talking to James and Rainichi Kianara. And they're explaining the results in our laboratory of their electrocardiograms, exactly what we talked about earlier. And following this, they wore a suit called a SenseScore suit. And embedded in that were electrodes that looked at their temperature, their electrocardiogram. We took their bloods every hour for 12 hours during the day. And we monitored them for 3 days during a bike race at Alton Park, which was quite interesting when we compared their results over a 3-day period. And there we are explaining the results to them of all of their heart health measures that we've talked about during this presentation. And there's Kianara winning everything as a result of the racing. So that's a nice way to bring this presentation to an end and show you how that can be applied to the whole area of sporting excellence. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Dugmore. A fascinating presentation. I mean, learning so much there. I'm a little worried going into the Christmas holidays that I'm not going to be disciplined on all those things, but certainly come January, I'm making lots of notes there and really going to take some of your advice. Really, really interesting. So thank you again so much. And we look forward to welcoming you back again, I believe, on the 25th of January, for your next presentation with us, the Younger Next Year presentation about stress and resilience. So, folks, until then, thank you again, Dr. Dugmore, and we look forward to seeing you then. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. If you'd like to keep in touch with us, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram for the World Healthy Living Foundation. Take care. Good night. Bye-bye.